The spark that shook Italy. In the early 1990s, Italy stood on the edge of collapse, a nation drowning in politics, power, and corruption. Behind the marble walls of government, secret deals traded justice for money, and envelopes carried the price of influence. But one arrest, one man, would light a fuse that no one could stop. What began as a small investigation in Milan would soon expose a web of corruption stretching across the entire country, destroying parties, ending careers, and rewriting history. This is the true story of Mani Pulite, the clean hands operation, where justice rose from the shadows, and power fought to bury the truth. In the decades following World War II, Italy rebuilt itself from the ruins of conflict into a democracy dominated by a handful of major parties, chief among them the Christian Democrats and the Italian Socialist Party. These parties controlled government at both national and regional levels, embedding themselves in nearly every facet of public life. The state owned or heavily influenced key sectors of the economy, from energy and transportation to construction and telecommunications, and large-scale public works projects became central to Italy's post-war development. The lines between political authority and economic opportunity were blurred. Controlling a government contract often meant access to enormous financial resources, and this opportunity was rarely left unexploited. Political power was maintained through networks of patronage and clientelism. High-ranking officials rewarded loyalty with positions in public enterprises, lucrative contracts, and financial favors. Party financing depended in large part on these opaque networks, with illicit contributions, kickbacks, and bribes becoming normalized tools for sustaining political operations. The system created a self-reinforcing cycle. Businesses paid to secure contracts, politicians used the funds to strengthen party machinery, and bureaucrats enforced or ignored rules depending on loyalty and advantage. The culture of corruption was pervasive yet rarely challenged publicly. While occasional scandals surfaced, they were largely isolated incidents and did little to shake public confidence or disrupt the entrenched system. Italians were accustomed to inefficiency and favoritism, and many saw these practices as part of the cost of doing business in a heavily politicized state economy. The secrecy of the networks, combined with the lack of institutional oversight, allowed corruption to flourish unchecked, creating a foundation upon which decades of graft and bribery could thrive. By the late 1980s, economic pressures, increased media coverage, and subtle shifts in public expectation began to create cracks in the system. Citizens, frustrated by mismanagement and inequities, were growing increasingly critical of the political class. Beneath the surface, investigative magistrates and journalists started observing patterns that suggested corruption was not the exception but the rule. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the full scope of Italy's systemic corruption, revealing a political and economic landscape that had long been carefully shielded from scrutiny. In early 1992, Italy's quiet tolerance for corruption began to unravel inside a small care home in Milan. Mario Chiesa, a mid-level politician and manager of the Pio Albergo Trivulzio nursing home, was well connected to the Italian Socialist Party and considered a loyal figure within the city's political machine. To most observers, he was another bureaucrat in the endless maze of Italy's public administration. But beneath that ordinary facade lay the spark that would ignite the biggest corruption scandal in modern Italian history. On a gray February afternoon, businessman Luca Magni walked into Chiesa's office carrying an envelope filled with cash, a routine kickback payment expected in exchange for a public cleaning contract. It was the kind of transaction that had become so normalized across Italy that few questioned its legality anymore. What Chiesa didn't know was that Magni had already reported the demand to the authorities. Hidden nearby were plainclothes police officers and judicial investigators waiting for the exchange. The moment the money touched Chiesa's desk, they burst into the office and arrested him on the spot. That arrest, small and seemingly local, cracked open decades of political silence. Initially, the Socialist Party dismissed Chiesa as a lone thief, a single rotten branch on an otherwise healthy tree. Party leader Bettino Craxi publicly distanced himself, hoping the embarrassment would fade. But inside Milan's courthouse, investigators had already begun connecting the dots, tracing the flow of bribes, inflated contracts, and secret donations that spread far beyond Chiesa's office. Under questioning, Chiesa, once defiant, began to talk. His confessions opened the floodgates. Each testimony led to new names, new companies, and new politicians, a chain reaction that spiraled beyond anyone's control. What began as one arrest quickly evolved into a sweeping probe across Milan's political and business elite. The operation was named Mani Pulite, Clean Hands. Its mission was simple but radical: expose the system of corruption that had infiltrated every level of Italy's public life. Led by magistrates like Antonio Di Pietro, Gerard Colombo, and Piercamillo Davigo, the Milan prosecutors worked tirelessly, using every document, confession, and seized account to map the web of bribery known as Tangentopoli, the Bribesville. The press caught wind of what was happening almost immediately. Headlines erupted with scandal, and for the first time, Italians saw their leaders not as untouchable power brokers but as ordinary people summoned before judges. The sight of politicians in handcuffs, escorted by police through courthouse corridors, was both shocking and mesmerizing. Public outrage ignited. Citizens who had long suspected corruption but felt powerless to challenge it now saw justice unfolding in real time. In a single moment, the illusion of political invincibility shattered. The arrest of Mario Chiesa was not just the beginning of an investigation. It was the beginning of the end for an entire political era. What had been whispered in private for decades was now a matter of national reckoning. Italy, a nation accustomed to shadows and silence, was about to confront its own reflection. The weeks following Mario Chiesa's arrest sent shockwaves through Milan's corridors of power. What began as a small scandal confined to a single nursing home rapidly evolved into an unstoppable judicial storm. The magistrates who led the investigation, Antonio Di Pietro, Gerard Colombo, and Piercamillo Davigo, were tireless, methodical, and unafraid of the political consequences. They understood that Chiesa's case was not an isolated act of greed, but a single thread in a sprawling web of corruption that bound together businessmen, bureaucrats, and the most powerful political parties in the nation. As Chiesa began cooperating, the names he provided opened doors investigators had long suspected but could never enter. The Milan prosecutors launched a series of coordinated raids, each uncovering new layers of bribery and embezzlement. Companies that had once won every major public contract were found to be paying millions of lire in hidden tangenti kickbacks to secure government projects. The bribes were systematic, distributed through coded bank transfers, fake invoices, and secret intermediaries. In one raid, investigators discovered ledgers detailing payments to dozens of politicians across multiple parties. Soon, the magnitude became clear. It wasn't a few corrupt individuals. It was an entire ecosystem. Business leaders, party treasurers, and mayors were all entangled in a ritualized exchange of money and power. It was called Tangentopoli, the city of bribes, and its epicenter was Milan. The more the magistrates dug, the more the system collapsed under its own weight. What had been a silent pact between politics and business for decades was now exploding under the harsh light of interrogation rooms and televised confessions. Each new arrest fueled public outrage and fed the media's appetite. News bulletins began every night with images of handcuffed executives being escorted into police vans. In just 1 year, hundreds of officials were investigated, and the arrests spread beyond Milan, reaching Rome, Naples, Genoa, and Turin. The contagion of exposure was unstoppable. The old political elite, once protected by silence, was now turning on itself. Under pressure, party members began confessing, trading testimonies for leniency, naming colleagues who had once been untouchable. Inside the courthouse, the magistrates worked late into the night. Their offices were cluttered with files, phone transcripts, and bank statements tracing the illicit flow of money through Swiss accounts. The atmosphere was electric. Part crusade, part collapse of an empire. One confession would arrive before dawn, another before lunch, and each one revealed yet another connection between Italy's ruling class and the corruption that had funded its power for years. By the end of 1992, the investigation had grown into something no one could control. What began as one man's arrest now threatened to dissolve the very foundations of Italian politics. The walls of secrecy were crumbling, and behind them stood a truth too large to ignore. Corruption wasn't an accident, it was the system itself. By early 1993, the investigation had spread far beyond Milan, consuming Italy's political landscape like a wildfire. The once unshakable power structures of the post-war republic began to tremble under the weight of truth. Names that had ruled the country for decades, ministers, party secretaries, and business magnates, were now scribbled on the pages of indictment files. The Christian Democrats, the Italian Socialist Party, and the long-dominant Italian Liberal Party all found themselves under siege. Every morning, the newspapers printed new lists of arrests, and every evening, television news showed another politician entering a courthouse with bowed head and trembling hands. For ordinary Italians, it felt like justice was finally breaking through the walls of privilege. Crowds gathered outside courthouses, applauding the magistrates and jeering at the accused. The public began to believe in the prosecutors as national heroes, crusaders who had dared to expose what everyone had long suspected but feared to confront, that Italy's democracy had been running on corruption. Donations for the magistrates poured in from citizens who wrote letters thanking them for restoring dignity to the country. For a brief, electrifying moment, there was hope that the system could truly change. But behind the applause was chaos. The political machine that had ruled Italy since the end of World War II was crumbling. The socialist leader Bettino Craxi, once a symbol of power and ambition, found himself surrounded by accusations. Di Pietro's team uncovered massive slush funds connected to his party, revealing that bribes had become the lifeblood of every government deal. When the first arrest warrant was issued for Craxi's allies, the entire Italian political elite realized the system they had built was collapsing from within. The scandal's reach became staggering. By mid-1993, more than 3,000 politicians, businessmen, and public officials had been investigated. City halls, ministries, and corporate boardrooms turned into battlegrounds of panic and betrayal. Former allies testified against one another to avoid prison. The magistrates could barely keep up. Every confession opened 10 new cases. Files stacked high on the marble floors of the Milan courthouse. Even the hallways were lined with boxes of evidence. The pressure was immense, yet the prosecutors pressed forward with unwavering resolve. Television became the stage for a national reckoning. Italians watched live as politicians were interrogated, sometimes even breaking down in tears. The old excuses, "Everyone does it. It's how politics works," no longer carried weight. The truth was undeniable, and the country's institutions could not bear the strain. Bettino Craxi stood before Parliament to defend himself, but his words were drowned by anger. As he left a hotel in Rome, an angry crowd hurled coins at him, shouting, "Take these! You'll need them now!" It was the symbolic end of an era. By late 1993, Italy was in a political freefall. Entire parties that had governed for decades were collapsing. The Christian Democrats and Socialists, pillars of the Republic, were disintegrating under the force of the investigation. The Prime Minister resigned, coalition governments fell apart, and a sense of national exhaustion set in. Yet through the disillusionment, one fact remained clear: the truth had finally come out. The invisible system of bribery and power that had shaped Italy for 40 years was now visible to the world, and nothing would ever be the same again. By 1994, Italy was a nation standing in the rubble of its old political order. The parties that had ruled since World War II, the Christian Democrats and the Socialists, were shattered. Their leaders had either resigned, fled, or faced trial. The system that had defined Italy's First Republic was gone, swept away by the tide of the Mani Pulite investigation. Yet the fall of the old guard created a dangerous vacuum. Power, like nature, despises emptiness, and into that emptiness, new figures began to rise. The collapse of the traditional parties left millions of voters disillusioned and angry. Italians who had once been loyal to their political identities now felt betrayed. The corruption trials had cleansed the surface, but underneath, frustration and confusion spread. The economy was unstable, unemployment was climbing, and faith in the government was at an all-time low. The magistrates, once hailed as heroes, were now overwhelmed by the magnitude of the fallout. They had torn down the old structure, but no one had decided what should replace it. And then, almost overnight, a new voice emerged from the chaos. A billionaire media magnate named Silvio Berlusconi. With his empire of television networks, newspapers, and football clubs, Berlusconi understood the power of image and narrative better than anyone. He presented himself as the savior of a broken Italy, a man untainted by politics, promising efficiency, wealth, and pride. His slogan, "Forza Italia," became a rallying cry for a weary population desperate for something new. Berlusconi's rise was meteoric. In a few short months, he transformed his media influence into political dominance. While the magistrates were still dismantling the old parties, Berlusconi built a new one. His charisma filled the void left by the socialist collapse, and his media networks projected him into every Italian home. The same television screens that had broadcast the arrests and confessions of corrupt politicians now carried Berlusconi's smiling face, promising rebirth. Meanwhile, the magistrates of Monte Pulite continued their work, though the mood had changed. Their files still filled rooms, their evidence still exposed names, but the nation had grown weary of scandal. Some Italians began to believe the operation had gone too far, that it had destroyed politics itself. The unity that once supported the prosecutors was fracturing. Critics accused them of overreach, of using the courts to wage a moral crusade rather than uphold the law. The lines between justice and politics blurred, and the winds of public opinion began to shift. By mid-1994, Italy was no longer the country it had been 2 years earlier. The First Republic had ended. A Second Republic had begun. The faces of power had changed, but the deeper structures of influence remained. Some of the businessmen who had survived the trials adapted quickly, finding new allies in the emerging order. Others vanished, leaving behind ghost companies and empty offices. The media declared the revolution complete, yet in quiet corners of Milan, a few prosecutors knew that the corruption they had fought was not dead, only transformed. The story of Monte Pulite was both triumph and tragedy, a victory for truth, but a reminder of how power adapts to survive. As the sun set over Rome in the spring of 1994, the camera would find the empty steps of the courthouse, the echoes of voices that had once promised a new dawn. Justice had exposed the rot, but history had already begun to rebuild its walls. By the late 1990s, Italy had entered a new age, one built not on the ruins of corruption, but on its transformation. The old political order was gone, but the habits of power had not vanished. Silvio Berlusconi, now Prime Minister, embodied this paradox. He rose from the wreckage of Tangentopoli as the symbol of renewal, yet his wealth and influence came from the very system Monte Pulite had exposed. He controlled television, owned newspapers, and surrounded himself with loyalists from business and media. To millions, he represented hope and prosperity. To others, he was proof that the ghosts of the First Republic still ruled. Only now, they wore better suits and smiled through TV screens. The magistrates who had led the crusade found themselves facing a different kind of pressure. Their files were still open, but public enthusiasm had cooled. The same Italians who once applauded their arrests now accused them of being too aggressive, too political. Di Pietro, the face of the investigation, resigned in frustration, leaving behind an unfinished revolution. Without his presence, the unity of the Monte Pulite team began to fade. The courts still tried the remaining cases, but they no longer captured the nation's attention. The media that once celebrated the prosecutors now focused on Berlusconi's charisma, his football team victories, his glamorous events. Justice had become yesterday's story. Berlusconi's government promised modernization, tax reform, job creation, media growth, and for a while, Italy seemed to stabilize. But beneath the prosperity, new networks of influence quietly formed. Businessmen who had survived Tangentopoli found ways to rebrand themselves. Lobbyists returned with new titles, and political favors continued. Only now more discreet, more digital, hidden behind legal fronts and offshore accounts. The system had evolved, not disappeared. In Milan, the old courthouse stood as a monument to a dream that had briefly come alive, a nation where law stood above power. But by the dawn of the 2000s, that dream felt distant. Trials dragged on for years, verdicts overturned by appeals, and sentences reduced until few ever saw prison. The people who had once thrown coins at corrupt leaders now turned their eyes elsewhere, weary of politics, seeking escape in television shows and football matches. Still, the memory of Monte Pulite lingered like a ghost. Every new scandal, every whispered deal and media revelation was compared to it. Italians would ask, "Is this Tangentopoli again?" As if the past had never fully gone away. The investigation had changed history, yes, but it had not changed human nature. Power adapted. Money found new channels. And justice, though once the hero, faded into the background, watching as history repeated itself in more polished form. In the quiet streets of Milan, Di Pietro sometimes walked past the courthouse he once electrified with justice. The lights were dimmer now, the journalists gone, the files archived. Yet in those walls still lived the echo of a time when truth had dared to challenge an entire nation. When for one brief moment, Italy had believed it could start over. By the 2010s, the legacy of manipulite had transformed into something far more complex than its creators could have imagined. For a brief moment in the 1990s, Italy believed it had purged itself of corruption. But history had a cruel sense of irony. The investigation that once promised a rebirth had instead revealed a truth that many preferred to forget: that corruption in Italy was not a disease, but part of its political DNA. The old faces were gone, but their methods lived on through new generations. Political parties had changed names, colors, and slogans, yet the same invisible exchanges, favors for funding, power for silence, continued beneath the surface. Where envelopes once passed under tables, now contracts were hidden in encrypted emails and offshore accounts. Technology had modernized corruption, but the essence remained. The ghosts of Tangentopoli had not vanished, they had adapted. For the Italians who lived through those years, the memories remained vivid: the flashing lights of police cars outside ministries, the televised confessions, the coins thrown at Bettino Craxi, the faces of the magistrates who became national heroes. But for the younger generation, manipulite had become history, a story told in documentaries and dusty archives, too distant to feel real. Schools mentioned it as a turning point, but few understood its weight. Antonio Di Pietro, who had once been the face of hope, entered politics for a time, but eventually faded from the national stage. His voice, once thundering against injustice, grew quiet. He often said the fight was never truly won, only paused. The Milan courthouse, once buzzing with cameras and crowds, became ordinary again. Its marble halls, where Italy had watched its conscience unfold, now echoed only with the soft steps of clerks carrying files for smaller, forgotten cases. Yet the legacy of manipulite endures in every scandal that follows. Each time a politician is caught, each time a business deal turns into an investigation, journalists and citizens alike whisper the same word: Tangentopoli. It became more than an event. It became a warning, a mirror that Italy holds to itself whenever power grows too confident. And still, the question remains: did manipulite truly change Italy, or did it merely show what Italy has always been? Perhaps its greatest achievement was not the trials or the arrests, but the courage it gave a nation to look in the mirror, even if only for a moment. As dusk falls over Milan, the courthouse stands silent, its stone walls stained with time, but its legacy carved deep into the conscience of a country. Somewhere inside, in the quiet of an archive room, an old file lies sealed, marked Operazione Manipulite, 1992. The story may have ended, but the fight between truth and power never does. The Clean Hands Legacy. In the end, manipulite was never just about trials, arrests, or the collapse of parties. It was a moment when a nation looked in the mirror and saw both its courage and its corruption. For a brief time, the people believed that justice could reach even the highest walls of power. But power always learns how to survive. The faces changed, the systems adapted, and new scandals rose where old ones had fallen. Yet something did remain, a scar, but also a memory. Of judges who dared, of citizens who hoped, and of a generation that saw how truth could shake empires. Italy was never the same again, and neither was the world watching it. Because manipulite was not only a story of corruption, it was a warning that every democracy, no matter how proud, can rot from the inside if no one stands to clean its hands. Thank you for watching this series on Criminal Mind Archive. The story of manipulite reminds us, corruption hides in every shadow, but truth has a way of finding light. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's darkest political secrets and untold crimes. This is Criminal Mind Archive, where history speaks and the truth never dies.